Welcome to the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Davis. AEW began Revolution 4 years ago with the adequately named pay-per-view this weekend, which we'll discuss this episode. Where does everyone fit into this picture of a wrestling revolution? The likes of Kenny Omega, FTR, Chris Jericho, and more are figuring that out, much like the legends and celebrities in WWE are figuring out where they fit into the WrestleMania card. All of this and more on today's episode of the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. Stay tuned on Facebook Live, YouTube, and TobaccoRoadSportsRadio.com. Welcome to the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Davis, and we have a blackboard behind us. If you are watching live on Facebook or YouTube right now, we have a big show in store for you. I'm super excited about this episode because I remember being excited one day with a press conference where AEW announced a new company, a new brand. We had been lacking that for so long. And AEW started up 2019, January. They do a press conference. They work their butt off for the next few years. And they finally get to All Out. And now we are here 4 years later. And there's been a lot to happen in the company. There's been a lot to happen in AEW, and now we're seeing a shift, a story play out, if you will, because we have AEW. Okay, we have the pandemic. Everyone's wanting to leave WWE to go to this new place called AEW. And that's great. That's awesome. And CM Punk came, Bryan Danielson, Adam Cole, everybody who was somebody, they're wanting to go to AEW and build their own brand and build this brand of AEW because we hadn't had a secondary, company other than WWE. So whenever you don't have competition, this is why everyone loved the Attitude Era so much. Everyone loved the Attitude Era, and because there was WWF, there was WCW, and they were competing to stay alive. They were competing to get the viewers on Monday nights. And competition's always healthy in the wrestling business. And then we saw another seismic shift this past year with Triple H taking over creative. When Triple H took over creative for WWE, that was a seismic shift in that company. So when that happened, all right, Triple H is helping the creative side more. Triple H is listening to the talent more. All of this is good stuff. And then CM Punk and the brawl out with the EVPs. Your world champion suspended, stripped of the title. Your EVPs, your World Trios champions, suspended, stripped of the titles. And there's been a shift back towards WWE. And then Vince McMahon comes back. And now we're kind of trying to figure this dynamic out. And perhaps the busiest time as a professional wrestling fan, we got WrestleMania season. We just had the Royal Rumble. We just had Elimination Chamber. Now we're on the fast track. We're about 4 weeks away from WrestleMania, the biggest event in WWE. We have AEW Revolution this weekend that we'll get touch on this episode. But it's kind of concerning because now we're hearing about wrestlers, and particularly in AEW, their contracts are running out. And Kenny Omega was recently a guest on Renee Paquette on The Sessions. Renee Paquette, married to Jon Moxley of AEW, now an employee of AEW, and asked about Kenny Omega's future in professional wrestling. I'm going to quote what Kenny Omega said on Renee Paquette's podcast. Says, sometimes, the first thing that pops into your mind is probably how you really feel. And the first thing that came to mind wasn't, a venue. It wasn't a title. It wasn't some kind of accolade. I feel like whatever is that I can contribute to wrestling, I want to be able to help people in the next generation realize the potential as quickly as possible or quicker than I was able to. If I can help give anyone advice or to help push them into a certain direction that can lead to something good for them career-wise down the road, that is where I'd like to see myself. I don't feel like I have too many goals or aspirations of my own anymore. So there's a lot of questioning whether Kenny Omega, once his contract ends with AEW, could he make the jump? Kenny Omega's only promotion that he hasn't worked for, he's worked for New Japan, he's worked for Impact, he's obviously started something in AEW. Could he go to WWE? And I do want to say, with this cloud hanging over it, not where our Instagram handle is, right here on the blackboard behind me, if you're watching on Facebook or YouTube right now, I don't want to go further in this conversation without mentioning WWE is up for sale. Vince McMahon is trying to sell the company. So whatever this new dynamic is, Pat McAfee even said this week, he's hesitant to work with WWE. Right now, he came back. He took a break for College Game Day in the fall, but he came back and did the Royal Rumble, was very entertaining. Hasn't been seen since, wasn't even at Elimination Chamber. I'd imagine, and I hope he's at WrestleMania this year. But Pat McAfee mentioned he's hesitant to do business with WWE, not knowing who he'd be working for. Would it be the Saudi government? Who knows? And that's got to be something you keep in mind when you're talking about who could be jumping ship in AEW, because there's not really a free agency period. Okay. There's not really a free agency period. There's not an off season. It's basically when your own contract ends, where are you going to go sign? And I know we have scrolling on the bottom line, can some stars jump ship in free agency? And this is what I love about professional wrestling, about sports entertainment, whatever you want to call it, really, is there's no off season. There's not a time period. We're about to enter in the NFL where there's 2 or 3 weeks of free agency, but there's no NFL games. We got the XFL. We talked about that last week on Al Pago and Michael Davis. Jason Cetek joined me for that one. But people are jumping all the time with new shows coming out, with fresh content, allows the surprise returns, allows the surprise debuts to happen in wrestling. And Kenny Omega might. That door opened when Cody Rhodes walked through that door. Cody Rhodes cut promo a few weeks ago where he didn't create the forbidden door. He didn't create the forbidden door. He is the forbidden door. He did draw attention to competing in the independent scene when he left WWE and took off the Stardust face paint and went to Japan, went to Ring of Honor, wrestled at these independent companies that he'll be representing WrestleMania weekend on his little gear belt, hoping to replace that with championship belt. He's done all this stuff. He's created an entire new company with AEW. And then he was the one to create the forbidden door by jumping ship from AEW. The first name to jump from AEW WWE was the guy who helped start the company as an EVP. Like that is something that King Omega probably has in the back of his mind with dream matches with Roman Reigns. He's been vocal about Roman Reigns being top of this game. Seth Rollins. AJ Styles is still in WWE. Could AJ Styles jump to AEW? He hasn't expressed any interest in that just because of the stage he's at in his career. But there are so many names. Gunther versus Kenny Omega would be a banger, as Sheamus would say. Kenny Omega and Sheamus. So we have to keep in mind that nothing is impossible right now. But Kenny Omega also was suspended by AEW. Does that come into play when he's thinking about, should I re-sign with AEW? Should I continue to be an EVP? Or should I take a break and just wrestle? That's all I want to do. And that's now the place. WWE could be the place for him and Cody, where they don't want to be management and they just want to wrestle, which is ironically where a lot of people have come to AEW for. One of those people, or one of those tag teams, was FTR, Cash Wheeler, Dax Harwood, whether you know him as Dash Wilder and Scott Dawson in WWE, FTR, The Revival, those guys came to AEW just because they wanted to wrestle. And they've shown their love for the business by participating in independent shows. Got to Banner isn't behind me this week. We got Blackboard. We got Chalkboard, guys, with our Instagram handle right above me at Drop the Mic Wrestling. You can follow us on Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, Facebook, the whole 9 yards. FTR has thought about maybe, and there's been creative differences. And I believe with a team as passionate as FTR, you're going to have disagreements when you talk about the business side, when you talk about the creative side. But there seems to be more disagreements when it comes to Tony Khan and how he runs AEW. I think a big missed opportunity last year, All Out. FTR was the highest tag team in wrestling. Still might be. And you had the Young Bucks just capture the AEW tag titles. And what titles did FTR, what were they missing? Yep, they were missing the AEW World Tag titles. And Tony Khan never capitalized on that opportunity, which was very unfortunate. FTR kind of mum on what they're going to do after April. They've run themselves into the ground, honestly, with how much they're doing, which as a fan, we appreciate. But maybe after April, they just take a break, or we might get into a little later in the episode where they could fall in terms of competing. But Chris Jericho also made comments this week about it's pretty doubtful that he returns to WWE because he has such a prominent role, a leadership role, has so much creative power when it comes to AEW. See, Kenny Omega and FTR, it would benefit to go back to WWE, whether it's proving themselves wrong or proving themselves right, rather proving others wrong, just wanting to wrestle, proving themselves at WWE, because WWE is still at the pinnacle of the profession. Chris Jericho, he's put his creative hat on. Unless it was a one-off match, unless it was a Hall of Fame, I don't see Chris Jericho going back to WWE really anytime soon, because he's done amazing stuff for them. And he said it before, the original reason he left WWE was he saw the writing on the wall when he had the match with Kevin Owens, the hottest story in wrestling, and it didn't main event. Chris Jericho saw his ceiling as a legend. Mentioned Kurt Angle. Kurt Angle, the reason he retired a year early, Vince McMahon wanted him to stay a year. Kurt Angle's like, no, because you're just going to job me out to these young guys, which he gets it. He can't do all this stuff. He's not the Olympic gold medalist. He's not the guy who won with a broken freaking neck anymore. He's slowly moving around the ring. He's digressed in his wrestling abilities just because of his health. Chris Jericho sees that writing on the wall, sees a perfect opportunity to step in as a management, step in as that guy who can provide knowledge to the younger crowd and stay in AEW. But there's two guys who are signed with WWE right now, and I can't say I'm entirely confident in their abilities on the WWE platform. And two of them are Dragon Lee. Does Dragon Lee keep? I haven't seen Dragon Lee at all. He might be in the Performance Center just getting accustomed to everything. Dragon Lee, does he keep his moniker? Does he keep the mask? Does WWE let him be him? And that was the question with Ricochet coming out of New Japan, out of Lucha Underground. Are they going to allow Ricochet to be Ricochet, or do they want Ricochet to be someone else? And what do they allow with Dragon Lee? Another question that comes into mind is Colby Corino. Now, I've been very impressed with an independent promotion locally. They, again, usually have the banner in the background. We have a chalkboard this week, kind of changing locations up a little bit. But Colby Corino signed with WWE. I believe he's like 26 years old. And they're doing a story right now of Colby Corino, John Skyler, definitely blurring the lines of kayfabe, much like Tony Khan's done in the past with MJF and the pipe bomb promo, with a couple other things that AEW's done. AML, that independent promotion, has done a really great job of just blurring kayfabe and making you believe it's real. I was at that event where Colby Carino got hurt and John Schuyler hung him over the ropes, and that was an intense moment. John Schuyler gaining so much heat in that moment. Was at an AML event again this past weekend where John Schuyler did the same thing with another independent wrestler, but we got Colby Carino, John Schuyler, AML empty arena match this Friday afternoon at I believe 2:00. I'm gonna have to go back and watch it after work. But Colby Carino, what's his shelf life in WWE? You mentioned just fit in the mold of a WWE superstar. And that's what we saw when Vince McMahon took over NXT, rebranded as NXT 2.0. We saw more of the typical WWE look. You got your Braun Breaker, you got your Grayson Waller, you got your Creed brothers, you got these guys who fit more the WWE mold than a Colby Carino. Not to say that Dragon Lee and Colby Carino are not talented, because quite the opposite. They wow me in those moments. But are they allowed to be themselves? And circling back to what Pat McAfee said, who owns WWE in 3 months from now? How do they value Colby Carino? How do they value Dragon Lee? If somebody like FTR, Kenny Omega, how does that new owner value that talent? Because they can jump over with Triple H believing in them, and that's great. But if Vince McMahon sells the company to an outside company, an outside entity, and they don't see eye to eye with Triple H's create, they can do whatever they want because they're going to spend billions on this company. It's their company. They're going to determine creative. So that's something you have to keep in mind looking forward. But when we come back, we're going to talk about AEW Revolution, the pay-per-view this weekend. Talk about, who could win this 60-man Iron Man match. Could it end in a draw? What's the safest way to do that? Next on the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. Welcome back to the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Davis. We got a good show for you today. We just talked about the revolution in wrestling, where talents could land, but we got the AEW Revolution pay-per-view this weekend, which is really great. And we talked about Kenny Omega last segment. We're going to run through this card real quick. The AEW Trios titles are on the line. Kenny Omega, currently 1/3 of the champions with the Young Bucks, Matt and Nick Jackson, collectively known as the Elite, the EVPs, the guys who are coming off of suspension and won a best of 7 series against Death Triangle. But they face House of Black. House of Black, very, very interesting in regards to what they bring to the table, who they could beat. I'm a big fan of what Malachi Black, Buddy Matthews, Brody King, even Julia Hart joining that group, kind of being that X factor, that mystery piece, mystery ingredient, if you will, like the mystery meatloaf that you usually have in your cafes. It works. But do you see them beating the Elite? To me, I don't. I don't think House of Black's gotten that push yet. I don't think the Elite just winning the titles are not going to drop them immediately to the House of Black or to anyone, unless Kenny Omega is seriously considering losing the Trios titles and signing with WWE when his contract expires with AEW. That is the only scenario I could see the House of Black winning, but then you have to balance. Okay, we know the internet, the IWC is going to swarm with those rumors that Kenny Omega dropped the belts because he's leaving for WWE. Do we want that attention? But do you also want them dropping on a random Wednesday? And because you're going to add fuel to the fire either way. But my pick here is the Elite. We got a triple threat match for the AEW Women's World Title. Jamie Hayter defending against Ruby Soho and Saraya. Saraya is eventually going to be champion. I feel like that goes without saying. I feel like CM Punk was guaranteed a world title run when he got to AEW. I feel like Cody Rhodes, Matt Cosgrove and I have talked about this. Matt had him on the show last week. Great guest. Did Cody Rhodes get promised a world title when he came back to the company? Did he get promised on the grandest stage? Well, Saraya likely guaranteed to become champion at some time, even though I don't believe she needs the title. She's recently gotten a heelish attitude that I think CM Punk, if he had stayed, could have really adapted and worked with. Could that have happened? But I don't see Saraya winning the title this weekend. It's a possibility. Ruby Soho, definitely a dark horse. Don't expect her. But Jamie Hayter likely retains. Jamie Hayter probably beats Ruby Soho. And we get a continuation of Jamie Hayter and Saraya perhaps down the road. We got Double or Nothing in May? It wouldn't be hard to do Jamie Hayter Saraya in May. That feud can get legs with Britt Baker. Even throw Dr. Britt Baker. Have her turn on Jamie Hayter, and that's how the title goes off Jamie Hayter. Or Jamie Hayter could overcome Britt Baker. There's so many layers. And this is a credit to AEW and how they've rebuilt their women's division, because that was obviously the weakest part of the company for the first 3 years or so. And Saraya coming was huge because now she can create stars. This can be an opportunity to create a star in Ruby Soho and Jamie Hayter. Jamie Hayter retains. And speaking of creating stars, we also talked about in the last segment, Chris Jericho not leaving AEW anytime soon. He's facing Ricky Starks. Can it be the end of this, please? And I love Chris Jericho with everything I have. Okay, Chris Jericho, some of the best, right? His last few feuds have went long. His last few rivalries have went a little too long for me. That's just me personally. Going back to Eddie Kingston, that went a little too long. Going back to the Blackpool Combat Club, that went a little too long for my taste. And that's fine, but that's just me. So I'm hoping that we can finally put to rest this Chris Jericho, Ricky Starks feud. But how does that work, right? How does that happen? I don't know. Do you have Ricky Starks just go over and Chris Jericho drop it? But then I think the Jericho Appreciation Society is banned from the match. So part of me believes let's be honest, that's probably prime opportunity to have Chris Jericho win. Nobody's going to expect it. It's going to be one-on-one. Jericho can bring out brass knucks. Jericho can put something in his elbow pad as he does the Judas effect. Chris Jericho could easily go over in that contest. And Ricky Starks can do something different. Samoa Joe, Wardlow. Okay. We talked about how this Jericho and Ricky Starks feud has went way too long for my liking. This blow-off match between Samoa Joe and Wardlow has come 3 months too late. And I'm trying to get people to picture this, because if you remember the picture, ROH Final Battle, guess who was on the cover? Samoa Joe. Samoa Joe, I can't remember if he wrestled like Juice Robinson, maybe. Maybe he did. It was a weird match that you immediately just insert Samoa Joe into by defending the ROH television title. It was Juice Robinson now that I remember. You had built up 2 months ahead of that time. Once Joe turned on Wardlow, it was like, perfect. Final battle. Winner take all, World TV title, TNT title. Perfect. That is perfect. Wardlow can be the face of Ring of Honor as you're trying to rebrand, rebuild. But honestly, that was just a forgettable match sandwiched into the double dog collar match between the Briscoes and FTR and Claudio Castagnoli and Chris Jericho for the ROH World title. That Samoa Joe match just gets forgotten between Juice Robinson. I had to think about, oh, who did Joe wrestle again? Okay, it was Juice. That was the perfect opportunity. Everybody had been watching AEW at that point. They knew Joe Wardlow in this rivalry. They both had a title. Just do it. Just do it. I actually believe Wardlow had beaten Samoa Joe, or Wardlow had lost the title in triple threat match with Powerhouse Hobbs at Full Gear right before Final Battle. Could have been perfect opportunity for Wardlow to say, hey, you took my title, now I'm taking yours. There's so much they could have done with that. Instead, Samoa Joe wrestles Juice Robinson. It's forgettable. And you've tried to keep my interest in Wardlow versus Samoa Joe for an extra 3 months because we're almost into March. And that happened early, mid-December. Well, now I've kind of lost interest. It's going to be a fine match between Wardlow and Samoa Joe, and I'm kind of curious who wins, but it was just way too late. And I think this is where my mind's headed. Wardlow regains his TNT championship because that's the only title on the line. It's not for the ROH television title, which Samoa Joe still possesses right now. Well, with ROH going into weekly episodes on ROH's streaming site, have Samoa Joe drop the belt to Wardlow. Wardlow focus on TNT championship and probably even get off of him by Double or Nothing in May. Wasn't impressed with his TNT run, or you could redeem it with this new run and let Samoa Joe solely focus on what he needs to do to help build the ROH brand back up in this new iteration. And somebody who's been instrumental, actually two somebodies who have been instrumental in leading the charge for AEW since the very get-go was Hangman Adam Page. He lost the inaugural AEW World title match to Chris Jericho, and Jon Moxley, who took that said title off Chris Jericho. And it's a Texas death match, baby. What else did you expect? Jon Moxley probably bleeds within the first. Can we put the over under at like 3.5 minutes for Jon Moxley to bleed? It could be a total swerve if Hangman's the first one to bleed. It's pretty obvious this is going to be gruesome. It's going to be brutal. It's going to be your typical Jon Moxley match. He loves doing these. I'll go ahead and say let's give it to Hangman Page. This is an opportunity for Hangman Page to develop his character. This is an opportunity for Hangman Page to add a little layer. And if you noticed during his quest for the AEW World title, he went through a lot of character development. He got discouraged. He found a new circle of friends. He got abandoned by his other ones. He went through all these stages till he eventually overcame his old friends, his new enemies, and won the AEW World title. And it was a great story, great character development. Now that he's back, now that they're using this real concussion that he suffered against Jon Moxley in a typical match, doing a very basic move. Now this is character development where he can beat Jon Moxley in a Texas death match, or he can get right up to the line before he crumbles. That is a very real possibility when it comes to what can they do with Hangman Mox. Hangman's my pick. Now, we opened up the show with a segment talking about the future of the business because of the Revolution not only happened in AEW this weekend, but in WWE, Ring of Honor, New Japan, everything. I mentioned a tag team, okay? Because I'm looking at the card right now. We got a tag team casino battle royal or something this week on Dynamite, or a tag team battle royal. Who knows? A casino tag team battle royal. The Revolution tag team battle royal was last week. Jay Lethal, Jeff Jarrett got it after Jeff Jarrett lost his father, Jared Jarrett, the week before. Casino Tag Team Royale this week on Dynamite. This would be a perfect opportunity to bring back FTR. If they are wanting to stay, if they're committed, this is a perfect opportunity to have them. If not, you get a tag team maybe like a Top Flight who needs a little push right now. You get I feel like Top Flight could be a good backup plan if FTR is not available. But FTR has had ties and connections to a lot of these teams, particularly the Guns, who are now champions. Which brings me to the point: the Guns need to retain these titles, right? I mean, this is the only way you can do it. If you had the Guns beat the Acclaimed on Dynamite to win the titles, you gotta have them retain, probably in a cheap way, to maybe further advance a Guns and Acclaim tag team match too. That's a great example of a story that just still has legs and has gone forever. But FTR would be a great insert into this match story-wise. Or you can develop your characters by inserting a team like Top Flight. But Guns retain there, which brings us to our main event of the evening. Maxwell Jacob Friedman, MJF, the guy who's better than you, and you know it. The guy who might not be better than me, because I certainly don't know it yet, if he is. Facing Bryan Danielson. Bryan Danielson, just like Jon Moxley's, anything with blood, death match, whatever. Danielson's strong suit, 60-minute Iron Man match. He actually challenged Hangman Page during his iteration as champion in a 60-man Iron Man match. Crowd absolutely beloved both those guys. Heyman walked out as champion. You could clearly tell MJF wins. I've been on record on this podcast before saying that MJF is going to hold this title until his contract expires, and he's threatening to leave with the belt to go to WWE, much like CM Punk did back in 2011 with the WWE Championship. Funny how their careers just intertwine, right? MJF wins, but my question is, can you leave the evening on a draw? Can you leave with a tie? MJF Danielson 0-0. MJF Danielson 1-1, 2-2, 3-3. I would go as many falls in this. Maybe even MJF even intentionally disqualifying himself one of those times. Protect him. Maybe tap out so he preserves his shoulder. Stuff like that could lead to a high-scoring Iron Man match, which wouldn't be a detriment to MJF as a champion unless they end in a tie or unless he gets the fall by using the Dynamite Diamond Ring or brass knuckles that William Regal introduced at Full Gear. Either one of those scenarios can work for MJF moving forward this weekend. But yeah, I'm not seeing any of these titles necessarily changing hands unless they give Wardlow the title over Samoa Joe if Samoa Joe focuses on ROH, or if Kenny Omega is on his way out. But we know who's not on his way out yet. MJF. He retains. I'll say this. He walks out of Sunday's pay-per-view, AEW Revolution, as the AEW World Champion still, whether fans are satisfied or not with the end result. And that'll be okay. That'll be okay in this instance. And what might not be okay with a lot of people is whether you're a fan or a talent backstage who's worked their butt off all year. WWE legends showing up at WrestleMania, celebrities taking spots. We're going to talk about that thought process next and how WWE can still make a great WrestleMania in Hollywood when we come back on the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. Welcome back to the Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Davis. You can see on the bottom ticker, we have all our social media stuff. We got YouTube, we have Spotify, we have Facebook. A lot of our early episodes are actually on Spotify. A lot of our later episodes are on YouTube and Facebook. That's where you can find those. We'll eventually get those episodes, at least the YouTube ones, onto Spotify, because I know you guys prefer that, but we want to push the YouTube and Facebook right now, and Instagram at Drop the Mic Wrestling to get all our content throughout the week. It's going to be pretty great. And what's going to be great, what I can't wait for, and obviously doing the social media as I record the episode, and you may be watching on Tobacco Road Sports Radio through the website. We also have a YouTube channel where I do Out of Pocket with Michael Davis Friday afternoons, 4 o'clock Friday afternoon. This Friday, it's going to be great. But we got WrestleMania on the horizon. What I have been complaining about before is celebrities, legends weren't a big presence for some WrestleManias that hold a near and dear place to my heart. They had some place on the show, but with more talent in WWE now, there's an issue. That issue being you have guys like Alpha Academy who has worked their butt off. Alpha Academy has worked their butt off with comedy, turning, they're basically polishing a turd, something that JBL couldn't do. They're doing all this stuff, and they're likely not going to be on the show. Santos Escobar, great talent, likely not on the show. Ricochet, Braun Strowman. I'm looking at the confirmed match card. I'm looking at the rumored card as of the last couple of days. And I'm seeing a lot of celebrities. I'm seeing a lot of legends. Now, my original thought was back long ago, they're not seen. Like, they're just part-timers taking away a spot from a full-time guy. There's truth in that. One way I couldn't have felt that way is The Rock. There's a story there. There's a story between The Rock versus Roman Reigns that you could have done. I wouldn't have probably justified The Rock versus a Gunther or Drew McIntyre, because that's just obvious you haven't built a star. Okay, WWE got a real good cop-out answer to who could possibly dethrone Roman Reigns. Cody Rhodes was a self-made star in AEW and landed in WWE's lap. So we're not going to get The Rock versus Roman Reigns. We're going to get Roman Reigns, Cody Rhodes. That's not this segment. But the story would have made sense for Dwayne The Rock Johnson to come back to WrestleMania. Looking at the card we have, they're clearly leaning to Logan Paul versus Seth Rollins. That's obvious. They're leaning towards John Cena versus Austin Theory, maybe for the United States title. We just had Becky Lynch team with Lita to beat Damage Control to become the women's tag team champions. I don't know if you would consider Brock Lesnar a part-timer. Now he's wrestled more the last couple of years than he ever has since he's been back. Does he get considered as a part-timer? Gets Omos, who we haven't seen in 4 months. Bray Wyatt, only one match in the last, since his return, and even since 2020, only one match would be his second against Bobby Lashley. Rey Mysterio, he's just there every week. He's a trooper. He doesn't fall in this category. Edge wrestles pretty much every pay-per-view as long as filming or injuries stay aside. But he's considered a part-timer. He's considered a legend. And it's leaving a lot of guys off. I mean, I just quickly ran through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 matches where there's a part-timer or a legend, and sometimes story doesn't make sense. Logan Paul, Seth Rollins, it's forced. Brock Lesnar, Omos, forced. Bray Wyatt, Bobby Lashley, forced. Edge, Finn Balor. The story's been written an entire year with that match. That's okay. Lita being inserted into this women's tag team with Becky Lynch, kind of forced. Not going to lie. Cena, Austin Theory, I can see that story. Just like I could have seen The Rock versus Roman Reigns. But there's an aspect that legends or celebrities bring to WrestleMania that I'm going to let slide, particularly when it comes to WrestleMania Goes Hollywood. If you look back to the original time they were in Hollywood, they brought out Stone Cold. They brought out Roddy Piper for Piper's Pit. They had Carlito there. Carlito gets stunned. Carlito gets attacked, whatever. We had Akibono versus Big Show in a wrestling sumo match. Okay, that was 2005. Okay, circle the wagons 18 years later, and those WrestleMania babies are on the verge of their 18th birthday. And great WrestleMania, by the way. You know, The Rock made a comment on one of his promos where, 9 months after WrestleMania, after The Rock got done competing, there'd be babies who were wrestling fans. And it's because they wanted to make Rock babies after seeing The Rock at WrestleMania. I digress. That was a tangent. So this trick is not new by any means. It's literally it's eyes. Bray Wyatt, one match in the last 5-6 months. One match in the last 3 years. He's like in the top 4 in terms of merchandise sales. Easy to place Bray Wyatt right there on the show. However you can do it. I felt like it was forced to put Bobby Lashley there instead of culminating Lesnar Lashley. Could have easily inserted Bray Wyatt into a feud with Braun Strowman. The story's already there. Strowman, Wyatt, fired same time, hired same time. Wyatt family, Universal Contenders / champion when Roman Reigns initially won the title. There's so much story there. Don't know why we're getting Bobby Lashley, Bray Wyatt. Logan Paul. And as much as I hate Logan Paul, I hate Logan Paul personally, just with a passion. He gets eyes on the product. It's in Hollywood, guys. It is in Hollywood. This is celebrity territory. As much as I don't like it, as much as I'd rather see Alpha Academy in a tag team match for whatever, as much as I'd love to see a battle royal, as much as I'd love to see just a weird ladder match for a mid-card title or Money in the Bank match, they need time for Logan Paul to go out, who is athletic, who can draw major heat, will have no problems drawing heat in Hollywood against Seth Rollins if they play their cards right. You're going to have to give him 15 minutes, 10 to 15 minutes, show some athleticism, do your job. Don't let Logan Paul go over on Seth Rollins, and bring Logan Paul back for a Saudi show, bring him back for SummerSlam. He can be inserted into a whatever program with a guy who's doing nothing, and that's your WrestleMania, because that's your big show. Logan Paul doing that stuff. Lita and Trish Stratus will have a role at this year's WrestleMania. Don't know if it's going to be a tag team match where Trish is managing. Don't know if it's a 6 women's tag match. We don't know the dynamic of that yet. But, who's not going to come back to watch Lita, Trish Stratus, especially when you're talking to friends who have been away from the product a few times, with the content being accessible on Peacock. You don't have to pay $50, $60, $70 anymore for a pay-per-view. You got Peacock, $5, $10 if you don't want ads, and you're good to go. You're good to watch WrestleMania this year. If you have friends who have been out of the product a long time, you say Lita, you say Trish Stratus, you say Edge, Rey Mysterio. You got non-wrestling fans who recognize Logan Paul against one of the talents, one of the companies and the industry's biggest, most talented athletes. You can get new eyes on your product that way. And so my concept has kind of changed, taking that perspective. But when I still see Logan Paul, I might go take my pee break. I might go heat up some wings. I might go do whatever. But that is it for the Drop the Mic Wrestling podcast this week. Thank you so much. Go follow us on social media if you haven't. YouTube, Spotify, Facebook, Instagram. Follow, like, subscribe, share this video with your friends. We'll be on Tobacco Road Sports Radio 2 o'clock. Wednesday afternoon, we'll be doing Al Paco and Michael Davis Sports Radio Friday at 4. So be sure to follow that as well. But it's been Drop the Mic Wrestling Podcast, and we will see you next week on the podcast, Friday afternoon on Al Paco and Michael Davis. Everyone, have a great week.